Strength isn't just about lifting heavier weights, it's about building a body that performs, adapts, and lasts for decades. Welcome to the Axis Method, a Strength Axis production. I'm your host, John Parker, certified strength and conditioning specialist, StrongFirst Elite, Beast Tamer, and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. I've been a private strength coach for over 18 years here in San Diego, California, and I've dedicated my life to the pursuit and mastery of strength and conditioning. My approach has always been functional and sustainable, combining intelligent training, lifestyle practices, and recovery strategies to help people build real strength and long-term health. This podcast is where we explore the science, philosophy, and practice of strength, from barbell training and kettlebells to variable resistance, metabolic health, and the deeper principles that drive performance and longevity. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Harambe System. Harambe System is a compact variable resistance training platform built around two core pieces of engineering. The Cyberplate, a stainless steel base with 12 precision rollers, and a patented pulley and sling system that spins smoothly and opens wide for easy loading of stacked bands. Together, they are designed to bridge the gap between bands and weights, combining the joint-friendly feel of bands with smoother, more consistent loading. And it works. Users are pulling 400 plus pound deadlifts, benching over 225 pounds, and back squatting over 300 pounds training exclusively with this system. Because most band platforms use static edges that create friction, wear out your bands, and reduce tension at the bottom of the lift, the Cyberplate addresses that by routing the band across spinning rollers instead of fixed edges, helping deliver more consistent resistance from the first rep to the last. And research has also shown that full range of motion under real tension is what drives muscle growth. And a 2025 study confirmed that as long as tension is present to the full range, muscles grow regardless of where peak resistance falls. That is the principle this system is engineered around. If you want to learn more, check out harambesystem.com/John Parker Ballistic. For me personally, over the past 2 years, variable resistance training has completely changed the way I look at strength. What I thought would be a simple experiment turned into a complete shift in philosophy. I realized I could build muscle, maintain strength, and express power without constantly beating up my joints or feeling wrecked from training. More importantly, it forced me to become a better lifter. Variable resistance exposes sloppy movement immediately. You can't just rely on momentum and ego. It demands intention, control, and real mind-muscle connection. It also taught me to auto-regulate naturally. Some days are high output, some days require more control, better positioning, and cleaner movement. The system adapts with you instead of trapping you inside fixed loading patterns. That's become a huge part of the Strength Axis philosophy. Train with the energy you actually have, not the energy you wish you had. I also appreciate how much it allows me to explore movement and challenge range of motion in a way that feels athletic instead of restrictive. Training feels more like practice and less like punishment. For me, the goal isn't just getting stronger, it's staying strong while still having energy to hike, ride, explore, and live a capable life outside the gym. So, if you're interested in building real strength, protecting your body, and applying intelligent training principles, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Axis Method. All right, welcome everyone back to the Axis Method. This is episode 12. I am titling this durability. That is one of my favorite words. And it's actually synonymous with resiliency. And this past weekend, I got to attend StrongFirst Resilient up in Modesto, California with team leader Mike Souza's gym. That was an amazing backdrop for the event. We had probably 20 plus people there. And the real highlight is I have never been coached by Pavel Macek and his wife, Justina Makova. It was a lot of fun to meet them. They came out from the Czech Republic. I think they explored different parts of California. And I'll just say they had tremendous energy that really fed the group, a lot of fun stories. And it seemed like every exercise that we learned throughout the course was also a history lesson. I know Pavel really likes kind of these strength origin methods of training with all the old dumbbell, kettlebell, and barbell stuff, but we learned mostly about resiliency exercises. And I encourage you to take that course when you can, or any courses from StrongFirst, because they're all very principle based and they feed off the other courses like SFG 1 and 2, SFL, and SFB. So I believe this was the last course from StrongFirst that I had not yet taken that's currently available. So I made sure to get up to Northern California, see my grandmother, see some of my really good friends and family, and it was just an amazing weekend. So instead of telling you all the exercises that we went over during that course, I want to talk about durability from my framework and integrate some of these StrongFirst principles that I've learned over the past 12 years studying with coaches like Pavel and Pavel Tsatsouline, right? We have Pavel M and we have Pavel T. So not to be confused, but both incredible coaches. Now, first off, what is resilience? I believe it's not flexibility, it's not mobility, it's not strength, it's not even conditioning, but it is the ability to express force, absorb force, and recover position when life doesn't cooperate. You can see why this is important, especially if you like to do things outside of the gym. I believe that was the main principle that Pavel Macek and Justina Makova were trying to teach in this course. All right, guys, let's start off with part number one. And I want to talk about the paradox within StrongFirst. A lot of times, programs are built off of complete reductionism in StrongFirst. You've seen Pavel's books like Simple and Sinister. It's only 2 exercises. And because it's 2 exercises, what I have seen is that adherence is much higher. When a student or one of my clients knows they only have 2 movements to do, they are not overthinking their training constantly, which is a big problem with all the available workouts on social media and people making outrageous claims about what their program does, when in reality, they should have just done a couple of exercises, but done them very well. That is the philosophy behind an inch wide, a mile deep. Now, within StrongFirst and hardstyle methodology, we often go from a neutral spine, a packed shoulder, vertical forearms. We work on tension mastery. But my question is, what happens after mastery? What happens when you've spent years becoming strong in ideal position? Because life isn't ideal and sport is not ideal. Combat is not ideal. For me, snowboarding, mountain biking, they are not ideal, or falling off a ladder. That is not ideal. This is where durability training comes in. And I've been inspired by this course, Resilient, to express to you what I think about durability, what I've realized with my clients and my own training over the years. First off, guys, I want to go over rolling. What does it look like when you're lying on the floor? Maybe you're just lying down and you need to get up. Are you able to segment your spine in different ways? Are you able to flex your spine, extend your spine, put yourself into a more ideal position? I have seen over the years that people have lost this ability, and I wouldn't say that's good because oftentimes when you fall on the ground, and hopefully you don't hit your head or do something to cause more damage, how do you get up afterward? Coming from a sporting background, when someone, let's say, got tackled, you want to go help them up. You help your teammate up, you help the opposite team up. But I purposely ensure that I don't help my clients up when they're on the ground. Maybe they did an exercise on the ground, or maybe we're doing a specific drill. I always watch them and make sure that they can get up under their own power. And it's not me just being a jerk, not helping my client up. This is part of training, and this is something that you cannot lose. You've seen babies in life. They go through very specific patterns where at first they're maybe lying on their belly. Next up, they're rolling around in their crib onto their back, onto their belly. Eventually, the arms take over and they kind of go into this prone position, kind of like a Mackenzie press up, and they're starting to load their shoulders. From what I know, I believe the shoulders are the first joints in the body that are actually loaded. Eventually, they rock back and they're starting to load their hips, and this is all segmented by their spine and core control. Of course, babies and young toddlers, they have bigger heads than their bodies can really handle. So their neck has to extend. This is something that we lose oftentimes if we're not doing simple patterns on the ground and rolling. This brings me to some training I did with Original Strength with Tim Anderson and Danny Almeida. A couple years ago, this is during the pandemic, I took an online course and we went over a lot of their baseline stuff, which I recognized immediately. We were really ensuring that our central nervous system was relaxing to allow us to get into different positions. Of course, we did this through their kind of trademark move, which is the rocking reset, but we started off on the ground. And when we got into our diaphragms and we did these breathing patterns, we could start to move our bodies more freely. I don't know, if you're like me, oftentimes at the end of the day, you just have so much tension in your body. The lower back aches, maybe a knee aches, or the neck and the shoulders are aching. And what happens when you get on the ground? Let's say your back was really stiff, you do some very light stretching, you get into your diaphragm. Almost always those back muscles are going to relieve some tension and we're going to feel better. There's a long way of saying that I think we need to spend more time on the ground first off. We need to be able to control our spine, even though we're horizontal and it may be under less load than if we're standing vertically, but being able to roll from side to side not only trains the vestibular system, but it gives us a lot of proprioception that then we can later use for some of our standing exercises or for just overall control for athleticism. Now, the rocking resets are something that I typically do every single morning. The way I learned the rocking reset was you actually don't keep your neck in a neutral position. You're going into extension when you're doing these rocking resets. And you would think of it like this: when there's a baby on the ground and they're starting to crawl, they're typically looking up at their parents or whatever else is around them. Oftentimes, it's a no-no in personal training to have an extended neck, even though some people deadlift that way or they squat that way. In this system, it is not, because you want eyes forward. When I give rocking resets to clients, I say eyes forward at the horizon, and within about 10 to 12 seconds, people bring their head down. And it's probably because they have a lack of strength because they're on their computer or their phone too much, but it's interesting food for thought. Now, these rocking resets, how I typically do them, there are a variety of ways that you can do these exercises, but baseline, I get in a 4-point position. I may extend my arms a little bit further in front of me. My main point in doing this is almost like a movement meditation where I'm expanding my diaphragm and getting into my midsection on every repetition, all nasal breathing. And the magic is not just doing 5 or 10 reps, the magic is timing yourself. So if you're able to really get into that diaphragm, almost like a meditative breathing pattern, and you do this for 5 minutes straight, I guarantee you're going to feel better with that stuff. So get on the ground, roll around, see if you can do it, play with your kids, play a sport. I think rolling is just one of those things that if you don't use it, you will lose it. And one day you're really going to need it because you might take a fall or you might be doing a sport which you're not used to that position. And if you can get off the ground safely and do it quickly, it might save your life one day. Now, the rocking resets from that rolling section, they really move us into crawling patterns. So I've done a lot of crawling with original strength. I've done it with my TAC Fit certifications, which I absolutely loved. Crawling is hard, as you know, and doing a lot of crawling in different patterns is very challenging. Even in my martial arts practices, I am not a martial artist per se, but I've spent time doing taekwondo and boxing and Muay Thai, a little bit of jujitsu, and it's great stuff. I think when you have that background, especially if you're a kid, this is something you don't necessarily lose later on. But these are all places where crawling can be essential. It's essential to be able to move your body and kind of segment. One way I like to think about this is oftentimes when a client has back pain or maybe a dysfunctional inner and outer unit of their midsection, we can do an exercise like a dead bug. And on a dead bug, think about it like this: as the left leg is extending, the right arm is extending. We're trying to keep our low back kind of in like a press down position, but still neutral. So we're engaging all the core muscles properly. What this is doing is making it cross body. Same thing with a bird dog or some of the exercise I learned from Paul Chek. Oftentimes when we walk or we do anything in life, it's not just one muscle working, it's all these muscles working synchronously. And when we have that symphony of action, our body's going to feel a lot better. Through injury, we might lose that stuff, but getting to a place where you're actually doing crawling exercises is a higher iteration than what a rocking reset would be, or a dead bug, or a bird dog. Those exercises are all fine, especially as priming exercises. But I went through a period of about 3 years in my late 20s where I hired a gymnastics coach. His name was Cedric. And I remember my first couple sessions, the warm up that Ced would take me through was absolutely brutal. It was a workout unto itself. I'd be so sore, and we did a ton of crawling exercises. There are always different names for these exercises, but he would call a bear crawl a straight arm crawl. Think about arms completely straight. You're going to pike as much as possible, which is spinal flexion, using your abdominals and keeping completely straight legs. So straight legs, straight arms. And I remember doing this, and it took me a second to get good at it, but oh my gosh, you are training so much strength when you're doing this, and you're also training that straight arm strength for skills like handstands. Now, I've always felt like I was good at crawling because we did a lot of bear crawls when I played football. And every time we got in trouble, we'd probably have to do, 50 to 100 yards of crawling. Wearing football pads, and I don't know, that might weigh 15 pounds on your body. So this is a skill that I've always really enjoyed, but giving them to certain clients, first off, you're going to have complaints of hand and wrist pain. So you got to get the hands and wrists a lot stronger. You can see certain people can't completely go overhead if you are doing that bear crawling pattern. But systems like Original Strength or TactFit or even StrongFirst, we did mention that a bit in StrongFirst Resilient. We didn't go over much of it, but just really, really fantastic tools that you can use on a daily basis. Finishing up with the crawling, my interpretation is that you can use it to teach force transfer, the fact that everything is connected. The shoulders talk to the hips, the core talks to the extremities, the right side talks to the left side. A lot of people lift weights without understanding locomotion. I think that's a big problem nowadays because gym culture is so strong. Everyone who I see online is really into bodybuilding, posing, taking a selfie, and that's all fine and good if that's what you want your life to be. But when I got started as a strength coach way back when, training was something that you did to make yourself better at a sport. And if training is all you do, that is totally fine. But unless you're involved in a system like StrongFirst where you're thinking about this stuff, I just think it's an incomplete picture. That's why I always encourage my online students and my in-person clients to go for a bike ride, go for a hike, play pickleball, whatever sport that you want to do. So the general physical preparedness of our training sessions and the strength movements we do with kettlebells, barbells, dumbbells, or body weight make you stronger for your sport. You have stronger muscle expression, but now your sport is putting you into 360-degree movement patterns, ideally, and you're gaining athleticism. If you're just doing gym stuff and you're just bodybuilding, do what you got to do. It's just not the most ideal. Okay, from the crawling. Crawling is very challenging on the shoulders. It can be challenging on the hips and the knees as well, depending on the variation. But I want to talk specifically about the shoulder. StrongFirst has always had exceptional shoulder education. We do a lot of presses. We do a lot of get-ups. My personal favorite exercises that put the shoulder into horizontal abduction are the windmill and the bent press. That's a very unique way of training the shoulder that a lot of people miss. And if they didn't miss it, they'd probably have less shoulder pain. But in the course, we went over arm bars, which is one of my favorite priming exercises. And I give Pavel and Justina full regard because some of the armbar variations that they taught were a great reminder. Some of it I already knew, but I just wasn't doing it. So I've been back on my arm bars every morning, trying to get comfortable in, that deep stretch position. And he kept on repeating that Gray Cook said that if you can't hold that movement for a solid 180 seconds or 3 minutes, then you probably don't own that position. So really good food for thought. Can you breathe diaphragmatically when you're holding a kettlebell arm bar? Hopefully with a lighter kettlebell. I've been using like a 12 kilo, but I like a 16 kilo as well. Again, with the StrongFirst stuff, we already mentioned get-ups, bent presses. What about hanging? So in the body weights, I've taken this body weight course maybe once with Karen and assisted her twice at the same certification. We do a lot of hanging exercises. It's going to be really tough to do the tactical pull-up or any harder variations if you're not able to do a solid hang. Oftentimes in my training, it's funny now because Peter Attia, he's a popular podcast host and he has a great program. What I appreciate about him is that he gets all of his patients to do like a strength and resiliency routine on top of their healthcare. And I think he has a measure in there, like the top marks are being able to hang for 2 minutes. That is really tough. And it's funny, it's unassuming because sometimes I've had in our introductory session, one test I always give new clients is how long can they hang? And sometimes the strong guys can't hang. Oftentimes, I have seen women be able to hang for the longest period of time. And I've always thought that to be very, very interesting. Maybe because they weigh a lot less. For some reason, I don't think that's what it is. I think they might just have better transfer from their grip strength into their shoulder girdle. But that's just been what I have noticed. But hanging is extremely excellent. I did a lot of hanging in my time with Sed, my gymnastics coach, and I did Ido Portal's online coaching for a few years back around 2015. And we just did a ton of hanging and unique hanging styles. Some of this stuff we actually went over in Resilient, and that was fun. It was fun to do that stuff again because it's been a while, including things like German hangs and some other cool patterns. And I think that course just expands that conversation in such a good way that is probably more intelligible than doing some of the training that I've done in the past with like a gymnastics coach or Ido Portal. Now, with the hanging, here's what I generally recommend. I like to start every training session with my clients with a 60-second hang. It's one of those things where they can do it, but usually it's a little bit challenging where the grip starts to burn. But here's the reason that I like for them to do it. Number one, it stretches the lats in a very solid way. Number two, you're getting great grip strength. Number three, you are supporting your T-spine to go into thoracic extension. That's something that people typically lose, and we have to train that very, very often. Now, with the hanging stuff, you can also do variations of this. What I liked in Resilient, we did some hanging, and I had no idea this was an exercise in the course, but I had been doing this for years, where you hang from the bar and you swing your legs side to side. And if you do this properly, one goes forward, one goes back. You can even release one arm. But I started doing this hanging variation probably 15 years ago because I felt like it was a great way of loosening the lower back. Now, you'll have to take the course to get some of the other exercise that we did, but I can't recommend hanging enough. Some of my clients ask if they can cheat and wear wraps when they hang, and I say absolutely not. That defeats the entire purpose of hanging. But there are a lot of patterns that you can do with your hanging. And Pavel kept on reminding us in the course that the human shoulder, I've seen some of these studies, it's designed to do a couple really cool things. So one is hanging and brachiation. Brachiation would be like an orangutan swinging from branch to branch or vine to vine. And the other thing I've seen in some studies is the human shoulder is also designed to throw. Think about throwing a rock or throwing a spear for hunting purposes. And if we don't use our shoulders in those range of motion, like playing catch with the kids or swimming or even playing basketball, you're going to get very tight in that pressing pattern, which is typically the bench press pattern, sometimes the military press pattern. So 360 degrees really, really matters. Now, with the different variations, I just want to talk about the end range real quick. Can you own the position on the end range? Can you get comfortable being uncomfortable hanging from a bar, even when the grip is burning? And can you own it overall? I admit I probably need to hang a little bit more. I have not been doing my pull-ups, but if you are training pull-ups, think about it like this. If you're doing a set of 5 pull-ups, you might be accumulating time over the course of your training session. Or if you're doing other exercises like a hanging leg raise, you're probably hanging for a good 15 to 20 seconds. So imagine what you could do if you were a little bit more active and not in your head going for time on a hanging exercise. You probably have more than you think you do, but it's something that you need to practice. Let's talk about stability through motion. I think most people think stability means staying still. Sometimes it does, but the best athletes can create stability while moving. So I'll tell you a personal story of me bench pressing a couple of loads. I remember when I first got into bench press, I went to a gym in Salt Lake City and they had huge dumbbells. They had like a 115-pound dumbbell. I think they had a 125, but I didn't try that. And I remember bench pressing that dumbbell. I still have the video somewhere, but just the stability that's required to do that. The kettlebell is usually a bit easier to bench press than the dumbbell. And I just had to be full on vertical forearm. Everything had to be really tight. And I was very impressed that I could do that on my left arm. At the time, my left arm and shoulder were a lot more mobile than my right because I had had some injuries, but bench pressing that was cool. I remember at Mike Souza's gym where we took resilience, this was a couple of years ago. I think it was during the pandemic around Thanksgiving because I have family up there. So I visited Mike and we did a quick training session. That was the first time I had come across a 56-kilo kettlebell. So I told him I really wanted to bench press it. And he said, yeah, do it. So he watched me and I think he filmed the video of me and gave me some pointers on it. And bench pressing that 56 is pretty cool. My only issue with that is I'm pretty small boned and have small wrists. So that kettlebell just hurt so bad, racking it on the back of my arm. Now, the final bench press story, I did this at the rock climbing gym, probably pre-pandemic, but I really wanted to bench press a barbell loaded to 60 kilos. Actually, this one was 135 pounds. And it took me many, many tries, but I finally got it. That was probably the heaviest I've ever bench pressed. I've never felt the need to go heavier. Now that I'm more mature, I don't lift as heavy as I used to because I'm not trying to prove myself as much. But the barbell was definitely the hardest. The helicopter effect that it creates, having to have completely perfect dynamics of my body and balance of the body. But it all goes to show that the shoulder is very strong, but you have to train it through a full range of motion. Finally, with the shoulder, I think a lot of people missed this one. We did touch on Indian clubs. I believe Brett Jones and Greg Cook. I watched this video so long ago, but they had a video where they went over Indian club stuff. And that was kind of cool. It was I remember it being kind of rudimentary. I learned Indian clubs first from Paul Wolkowinski out of Australia, and he is just an incredible swinger of Indian clubs and other heavy clubs. And I actually did a seminar back at Mesa Rim, the rock climbing gym I worked at, where we went over the Gada or mace and Indian clubs. And I think if you can get good at Indian clubs, you are going to have a lot less shoulder problems. I'm going to brag because one of my clients, when he first got started, had, let's see, calciferous tendonitis in both of his shoulders. I got him on Indian clubs. This has been about 2.5 years. We do them every time we train, and he hasn't complained of shoulder pain in that entire period of time. My own story with shoulder stability, I got into Indian clubs first, then I got into the heavier wooden clubs like the Persian Mule. I still have my Persian Mule, they're sitting right next to me. And then eventually I got into the TAC Fit system and circular strength training, got the club bell certification, had to do that test. It was very hard. I have a full collection of club bells. I think club bells are honestly the best tool for most people. They kind of bridge the gap. I know a lot of people get into the mace. The mace is a good tool, but it's limited in options. And I'm not talking about just doing like this kind of jazzy stuff where you're moving around on the ground back and forth. I don't really like that training. I don't think it does that much compared to other forms of training, but I'm talking about doing 360s and 180s with the mace. Great. Great for the grip, great for some T-spine extension and shoulder stability. But the club bells, think of basic movements with the club bell, like a mill, reverse mill, certain pressing patterns, a clockwork squat. We could do a whole podcast just on club bells. I think most people need to learn club bells at a very high level. This is something I'm fortunate. I have probably 6 or 7 of my clients who own clubs based on my recommendations, and we use them very, very frequently. On my YouTube, I did probably 2 years of what I call cross modality conditioning, where I did kind of a kettlebell axe framework. I like a heavy swing, one arm swing or snatch. And then on the next minute, I did a club bell exercise. And I just found this to be fantastic training. My elbow tendonitis actually went away and I got a lot more stability. So remember, even though we are kind of talking about the shoulder with the hanging movements, reinforcing those with the throwing movements can pay dividends to long-term health and avoiding a lot of the pitfalls of rotator cuff issues or tendonitis issues that I see a lot of my clients have been plagued with for a long time. Finally, I'll just mention climbing. I have been climbing probably since 2006 when I studied abroad in Barcelona for a year. There was a spot where a lot of guys would go and do some climbing on the underside of a bridge. It was kind of like a, like a hemisphere shaped bridge, but there were climbing holds that you can go inverted and stuff. And I spent a lot of time from probably 2015 to 2020 doing a lot of bouldering at the rock climbing gym. And if you are a strong climber, you're probably strong at a lot of other stuff. So baseline, I don't necessarily think you need to climb at a rock climbing gym or climb rocks. I think climbing is more utilitarian in other ways, like can you climb a tree? Can you climb a wall? And maybe the highest iteration is, can you climb a rope? That is very difficult to do. But if you can do an arms only rope climb, maybe in a straddle position, you're probably strong enough for a lot of other stuff. Okay, so that's how you build a strong shoulder. Really quick, I want to get back to some of the hanging stuff. I think I skipped over that and it deserves a little bit more attention. Because modern humans spend their lives below shoulder height, like I am doing right now on the podcast, I have to mention, remember, shoulder is for not only climbing, but hanging and throwing and brachiation. The shoulder isn't necessarily fragile. You do have to treat it with respect, though. I'm not talking about just doing band exercises or PT exercises. I'm talking about real strength training. I have most of my clients who have any sort of shoulder issues. Every single session, we do dumbbell YTWLs or TRX YTWLs. It's hard for me to convince all my clients to buy a crossover symmetry, but my investment of the crossover symmetry, I do those exercises every time I train to kind of reinforce strong upper back because I lose that with my mountain biking. That's one thing I don't like about cycling, but doing that stuff all the time really helps to keep me open up as well as some of my shoulders stretching. So those are all really good options for you if you haven't gotten into those things. But remember, shoulder is not fragile. Sometimes it's just underexposed. And if someone, let's say, is an obstacle course racer, I don't know how popular those are anymore, but you got to think they have to climb over walls. They have to do rope climbs. Sometimes, like, I don't know what they're called, but it's like one of those ladders, a rope ladder, where they're doing brachiation or they're going over the top of it and they're crawling. That stuff requires a lot of stability. But remember, the shoulders don't need to live just in front of your body. They're useful there for sure, but even simple exercises like a side plank can really reinforce force, that horizontal abduction that we talked about with the windmill, bent press, and get up. And I think that's worth doing. And I mentioned that I worked at a rock climbing gym for a good amount of time. It has been fantastic because I still train a lot of rock climbers and they do other sports as well. But hanging exercises like pull-ups, for instance, or Frenchies, you'll have to look up a Frenchie. Maybe I'll put that in the show notes. Essentially, a Frenchie is, there are a couple ways to do this, but you would do a pull-up to the top, hold for a period of time. You would go down to arms at 90 degrees, hold for a period of time. Then you might go to 120 degrees, hold for a period of time, and then go all the way slack to rock bottom, active hang or passive hang, and hold for a period of time. So each one of your pull-ups might take 15 to 20 seconds. This just builds a ton of isometric strength in that hanging pattern that has a lot of applicability with climbing. Now, even though I don't climb as much as I used to, I have always appreciated my time climbing. The original reason I got into it is from some of my backcountry stuff that I've done. I had a hike, actually, it was with a guide. My friend was a guide, and this was in Teton National Park in Wyoming. And we did this climb and we got to a false peak. And I mean, those mountains are very rugged. The weather moves in very, very quickly. Long story short, we had to do a down climb. And this down climb was very sketchy. It was about 20 feet. And if I would have fallen that 20 feet, I might have had an injury and rolled down toward the cliffs a little bit. But I was able to down climb this. But I mean, my adrenaline was super high. This is not the only time that climbing has saved my butt. Basic climbing abilities of how to find a small chip for your toe and then smear your shoe into this hard granite, and having the finger strength to find a very small chip as well, or do a crimping motion on a small rock when you're in the backcountry, can save your life. I don't think I've told this story recently. Maybe I've only told this story to people that I know, but I'll mention it here. During the pandemic, I did a backcountry hike in Sequoia National Park with one of my friends who is very experienced outdoorsman, mostly hiking, but doing just really fun stuff. We went off trail. We had a map and I had GPS just in case. We were thinking about doing a 3-day trip. We decided to make it 2-day, and we knew where the High Sierra Trail was. So we began going down a wash, kind of like a creek, figuring it would just drop us off at this trail. Unfortunately, it got really steep. And in this particular section, you can look it up, it's called Bear Creek, I believe. We realized descending this creek that there were jagged cliffs and waterfalls all over the place. At this time of year, there was not a lot of water, but still a little bit of running water. So we didn't have to contend with the waterfalls so much. But I remember this like it was yesterday. I have never been more aware in my entire lifetime. My adrenaline was so high that we passed about 4 no-fall zones. If you don't know what a no-fall zone is, you cannot fall there because you will probably die. And we had to do a lot of down climbing. And if you've never down climbed, that's typically a lot harder than climbing up something. Because we were doing fast packing, which is backpacking with an ultralight load, I was wearing my Ultra Lone Peaks. He was wearing Ultra Lone Peaks, which are trail running shoes. We had our poles. We had no climbing gear, no helmets, no harnesses. Long story short, we made it, but it took us 4 hours to go 1 mile. We were so happy to get back to his van and my car. We didn't get back to the parking lot until about 10 p.m., pitch black. We had to use our headlamps on the way back. And that day ended up taking, it was probably a total of about 25 miles. And it was one of those, oh God moments. Thank you so much for allowing me to survive. But I credit the fact that I knew how to boulder and rock climb with not dying on those 4 times where we had to down climb. That is still the closest I have ever been to death doing anything in my life, and I'll never forget that moment. But the craziest part was the clarity that I had in my mind. I've never experienced that in my life. Fully present, fully calm. We're in a bad situation. We only have one option, that we have to get out of here. And my friend had a little bit of a harder time than me. Thank goodness he was also a former climber. So we ended up making it. But I remember I went first on one section, and it was probably a 15-foot drop onto a jagged rock and had to down climb. Thank God I knew how to roll, crawl, and climb, and had my hanging strength, because I dropped into a pool of water from probably 8 feet and avoided those rocks. But man, that was really, really rough. Okay, this is all why you need durability, and that's why we are talking about durability. Okay, moving on. So interesting discussion. StrongFirst teaches shoulder packing. Hanging teaches shoulder adaptability, and I think both are very useful. I think my final recommendation is because that joint in the shoulder is so mobile, if you are not training the shoulder to the side, below you, overhead, you're going to run into problems one day, and I hope that you do not. So get wise, do some windmills, do some bent presses, do some side planks, get yourself a crossover symmetry and some club bells, and you should be good. Okay, let's move on to the spine. We can say a lot about the spine, but if you really want to know about the spine, I suggest taking StrongFirst courses. They're very much in line with McGill and his big three and all of his research that he's done at his lab in Waterloo in Canada. And he's the real expert, and I defer to him on a lot of stuff. And my clients with spine injuries typically will do McGill big three all the time. It's just a really tremendous exercise to do. Okay, I'm hoping this isn't the most controversial section because StrongFirst became famous for neutral spine training in a way. Think about a kettlebell swing. We do a kettlebell swing with a straight spine, but the internet sometimes interprets this as never bend your spine. And I'm sure with your resources, if you're listening to me, you probably use a lot of the same resources. Guys like Squat University are fantastic. I like these PTs who are also trainers because they know these things, which normal people should know, but they don't know. So we can break some of these rules, but obviously we have to bend the spine. And I don't think that was ever the message from StrongFirst. I think the real message was that you have to earn the right to move. And I always tell people this. You get the people online who say you need to do all sport-specific training. You need to, like, why would you waste your time doing deadlifts? I know Nadia Aguilar hates deadlifts. I've always thought the deadlift is a useful exercise because you're going to circulate a lot of anabolic hormones and you're going to train your central nervous system in a very strong way. Is it the most functional? I don't know. All I can think of is this. When I was doing my stone lifting and getting a very low deadlift, almost like a Zercher deadlift position, my spine would be rounded, but I had the strength in order to do so. And thinking about picking up something heavy like a heavy box, you're always going to be doing it from a sumo position if you're doing it alone. So that argument that sumo is cheating is just completely ridiculous. But doing a swing with a neutral spine and a deadlift, that's always how we're going to teach people to do it. It's going to keep them the safest. They're not going to get injured on our watch. And it's just something that we should do. Later on, it depends on the athlete or the client, but we can bend the spine. So on this section, I want to talk about some exercises. Think about doing an abdominal exercise like a TRX crunch. If you are not going into spinal flexion, the abs are not doing their job. I'll see clients in the beginning, they're doing a TRX crunch and they're bringing their knees just to about their hip height. They're just working their hip flexors. To really get into those abdominals in that position, you need to bring those knees all the way to the chest, and you'll see they'll look like a little butterball turkey the spine is rounding. However, when we're doing an exercise like an ab wheel rollout, the T-spine might be a little bit flexed, but that lumbar spine has to be rock solid to train the core from that isometric position. So context really matters on this. StrongFirst Resilient explored some cool movements of flexion, extension, rotation, even some side bending. We did some side bending in our warm-ups. I do a lot of side bending because that's the only way I can stretch out my right hip and my right lower back, and it feels fantastic, but I don't go crazy with it. Some exercises I think about from the course, and I think this is public knowledge, so I'm not going to give anything away, but I've heard this called two things. One is the hockey deadlift, and the other is the gladiator deadlift. And think about it like this. You're standing with your feet together. Kettlebell is on the side of your left foot. You reach down with your right arm, and then you deadlift it to a standing position. So now the spine went through flexion and rotation. Is it bad? It's not bad as long as you start with a light enough load and you're able to brace your midsection. This is the type of durability or resiliency training long-term that really helps. Now, I do something, I don't think any of my clients have noticed this, but depending on my clients' training space, sometimes the space is very cramped. If it's a very heavy kettlebell like a beast, I will typically pick it up with proper deadlift form. But not always. Oftentimes, even like a 40-kilo kettlebell, I will just brace off of one leg with a rounded spine and I'll pick it up. Of course, I pack my shoulder and stay safe, but I have systematically trained my body in awkward positions for the past 17, 18 years. And I've done this intentionally. And I wouldn't do it in a stupid method, but I've accumulated thousands of reps of picking up weights off the floor in awkward positions to the point where I know that even if I didn't do any of the exercises from StrongFirst Resilient, I would still be very strong in those positions. Now, is that right for everyone to do? I don't think so, but it is an option to do stuff like that. In the course, we went over the Jefferson curl, and this was popularized by Coach Sommer with his interviews with Tim Ferriss back in the day. I realized that Pavel had listened to all of these, and I had too way back when. So I had been doing Jefferson curls with the Ido Portal program. I think the most I ever got up to was like a 100-pound barbell. And then we were doing 3 sets of 12. But on the last repetition at the bottom, you hold for an additional 12 seconds, then finish that last rep. I remember when I was doing the Jefferson curls all the time, my pike was so tight and I felt like my abs were really strong and a lot of my back pain went away. However, people that I train, general physical preparation and just general population, they might just start with segmenting the spine from the top. And we did that at Resilient. One question I had for Pavel is his thoughts on spinal waves. Now, just like the rocking resets that we mentioned earlier, I had told him that we did spinal waves in Ido Portal, but it wasn't like you're doing, 1 set of 10 repetitions. You would do a spinal wave pattern for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I have often taught this to my clients that if everything that you've tried, all the stretches for your back or whatever else that you're doing has not worked, we're going to do it together and we'll do 10 minutes of spinal waves. I have never had a client or myself say that your back does not feel better after doing spinal waves. I wish they added that to the Resilient program, but maybe it just doesn't fit in. It's obscure because it looks like you're dancing, you're trying to dance, but spinal waves, I will try and link to some of those in the show notes. It's just a really fantastic way of moving. One way to think about it, in like a lateral pattern, you guys have all seen how a snake slithers through the grass and that pattern they make. If you can do that with your spine, think about how much range of motion you're going to gain in each one of those facets. So we had a Jefferson curl where we're going into flexion. We have the spinal waves where we're moving all different directions. We have that gladiator or hockey deadlift where we're loading in a very safe way in an awkward position. And what about extension? I usually have my clients do an old iteration of a track and field warm up that I've been doing for years. One of the exercises is that you reach down to touch your toes. I don't really care if the back is rounded or not, because when you round the back forward, on the way back, you place your hands on your low back glutes. You're going to squeeze the glutes, and then you're going to turn all the way so you can touch the crown of your head toward the wall behind you. And this flexion extension really starts to open up the spine. This is not necessarily appropriate for every client if they are flexion or extension intolerant, but we don't often do this stuff in our training. And I'll admit, I'll do this stuff in my pre-training, but I'll lift with a straight back during my training. And it's okay because it keeps me safe. But if I'm not doing exercise on top of that, maybe I still am going to lose this stuff. Which brings me to the fact that we did a lot of back bridging in StrongFirst Resilient. And this is something I have trained in the past, so I had an idea of what I needed, but it's very, very challenging for me to do a back bend. I could probably do a crappy back bend right now, but straightening the arms, having the legs fully extended. We did a lot of mobility just to get there, opening up the shoulders with some hanging, some arm bars. We did forearm stretching. We stretched the hip flexors. We opened up the lower back and the T-spine. All this stuff is step by step, but imagine how you would feel if you're stuck in a forward posture all the time and then you got the skill to do a back bridge. I guarantee you'd be 2 inches taller. So why not do that? Okay, so the spine, it is really tricky. Consult your personal trainer, physical therapist, or healthcare professional on this. I've just noticed with my clients, I'm going to do a lot of things like the standard cat-cow, and then I call it look at the butt. You're doing kind of like a cat-cow, but looking back at your tailbone side to side. And if I can get them doing kind of some spinal waves, that's a really good way to kind of flesh out their training or prime them for their training ahead. Okay, let's move on to the neck. I love seeing this included in StrongFirst Resilient. The neck stuff is always something that I have avoided because I've had a chronically tight levator scap on my right side for like 15 years, and it's something I work on every day. But for a while, I had the iron neck. I got that this year. It's like that halo training device for your neck, but I didn't really find that it helped my neck like I wanted it to. And I kind of realized that I just have some crazy trigger points in my neck. So I actually sold that to a buddy of mine, but I was waiting for StrongFirst Resilient to learn Pavel's instruction on the neck because I thought it'd be a lot of fun. Now, are these neck exercises appropriate for everyone? They're different levels for sure. But how I've been using what I learned at the course, I do them in the shower. I do several stretches in the shower, and they can be basic isometrics with one hand on the side of your head and doing particular patterns, extension, rotational patterns. You can do a lot of stuff like that, or you can even scale it down. Paul Chek taught probably 30 years ago certain neck exercises using a Swiss ball against a wall. And I've always trusted Paul Chek because he had a really gnarly neck injury from doing a stunt with like a human overhead and they fell on his neck and he rehabbed his neck all on his own. So there were kind of flavors of that within Pavel's teachings, but I would recommend checking out some of his work because we started off with kind of these isometrics or just using your hand as tension. Eventually we moved to more tension by bringing the head up against the wall. Of course, we had like a pad so we didn't get smashed on like the fence or like the stucco, but that was a gradual loading. And then eventually you can load onto the floor. But he mentioned in the course, and you have to be smart with this as well, doing something like a wrestler's bridge can be dangerous depending on what your current levels are. I just always think of Mike Tyson. He did a ton of those wrestler's bridges where you bridge onto your head. And later on, he had some really bad cervical spine issues and some bulging disc, whatever injury he had. So you do have to heed caution of that stuff. Otherwise, you can check out a neck harness trainer, or you can just lie on a bench and put a weight on top of your head and do some flexion exercises. Lots of ways to skin the cat, but the neck is vitally important because the neck protects the head. If you don't have a head, you don't have a life. And we have to have a strong neck overall. And one thing I'll admit I need to work on every single day is mobility of my head. Also, check out some of the TACFIT stuff because we had a lot of head and neck exercise in that program. And I'll be frank, I couldn't do a lot of them. I did not have the awareness in my neck musculature to do certain rotational exercises without resorting to moving my shoulders. Okay, so neck is a tricky one, but I do recommend doing some stuff. Just start very, very slowly. Now, discussion point I wrote down. Why does every strongman from 1900 have a thick neck? Well, because they live physically and they did neck training. So if you're a football player, you definitely need some neck strength, or you're an MMA or other type of fighter, you definitely need a very strong and robust neck. Also think about how it affects posture. If you have good posture, I was just telling one of my clients last week, if you have good posture and you walk with your chest up, you're going to be more confident. It's just the way it works. Instead of walking kind of squeamishly around with your head down, it's not a confidence builder. And it's also worth working on your posture of your T-spine, your neck, because as you age, you don't get that back. It's a habit that you have to earn. And overall, it makes you more resilient. Okay, moving on, let's talk about the knee. So I think this is what a lot of people fear, is having knee injuries or hurt knees, or maybe they've already had injuries and surgery. This can be really tricky. Now, what about the knees over toes posture? I think this is largely dispelled at this point, but I remember older people in the gym telling me, what are you doing with that client? Their knees are going over their toes. Probably something they heard in the 1990s, and they just repeat it because they heard it back then and still think it's the case. As Ben Patrick would note, every time you walk backward, the knee goes over the toe. As I always note to my clients, every time you walk downstairs, the knees go over the toes. But what's the flexibility of your ankle first off? And what's the strength of your knees? If you're not doing squatting variations, you probably have weak knees. So when people come to me in the very beginning of training and they tell me, oh, this hurts, I can't do this, can't do this, can't do this, I have to systematically tell them, I'm like, well, you got to look at your lifestyle first. Like, you have literally done nothing since I saw you last. You've sat in your chair 12 hours a day for the past 7 days. Like, I agree, your knee probably does hurt. We have to move it. Now, there's some ground-based options that you can do. In the course, we did a lot of very cool stretching and mobility drills. One thing I was very happy with Pavel that he included in Resilient was what he calls the long split squat. I am going to call that the ATG split squat just to give proper attribution to Ben Patrick. ATG split squats in all of my Strength Access programs. A lot of you already do them. That exercise changed my life. When I first heard about that and read one of, I think, Knee Ability Zero by Ben Patrick back in the pandemic, I would walk the dog to the dog park and I would always wear my plate carrier. So I was doing a ruck and I would just do it with the additional 20 pounds. I would just do it from the floor. I didn't even elevate my foot. And eventually I'd work up to sets of 15. When that got easy, I would hold the last repetition and do like 15 pulses. Lots of ways that you can do this, but to today, I still do ATG split squats at least twice a week. Most of my clients do them as well for knee health and to stretch that opposite side hip flexor. People are often surprised when they get a full hip flexor stretch how their knees feel better. So it's a vitally important movement. I learned years ago from a very well-known physical therapist here in San Diego who works with a lot of NFL athletes, an exercise called a terminal knee extension, where you're using a band behind your knee and you're doing kind of just forward knee over toe, back knee. So it's kind of like an ATG split squat, but you're just biasing it with the band to build up that vastus medialis. This can be post-surgery or for athletic purposes. It's just always been a really fantastic exercise and way to train. Nowadays, I have most of my clients, and I do this myself, will train a Poliquin step up or a Poliquin step down, preferred on what you want to call it. I do mine on Harambe system. I might be 6 inches off the ground and really just focus on one leg at a time and getting a lot of activation in that vastus medialis. It also kind of works the same side glute medius. That's a really great way of training the knees. And for people with really beat up knees in the beginning, we're probably just going to do a lot of mobility, including frog stretching, because sometimes the adductors get so tight that they get pulling on the hip flexors and they're getting knee there. There's a lot of assessment that needs to happen with knee stuff, particularly. But I've just noticed that the knee isn't necessarily weak, but the knees are very specific and you have to take care of them. If you only expose your knees to one angle, that's all it learns. And I'm in a seated posture right now. My knees are not in a good position, so I'll need to open up later. But that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people with their job. Now, for me personally, I ride my mountain bike trainer and my mountain bike a lot. So I'm doing just thousands of quarter squats and my legs are extremely strong because of that. We don't need to talk about the range of motion benefits of deep knee bends versus quarter squats. They're both very good movements. Actually, I'll touch on it real quick. I believe at least once or twice a week, even if you don't train legs super heavy, you should load yourself in a full range of motion squat, like a double kettlebell front squat. And you should do that unloaded as well, just a resting position, allowing the spine to kind of curve around the thighs naturally. That is just so we maintain full range of motion. But for a lot of my leg training now, it's partial range of motion to help me with my mountain bike pedaling and kind of mimicking that motion to be very, very strong and consistent in that range of motion. But if you think about someone who is like a catcher playing baseball, man, I mean, they have really strong knees, but their body is accustomed to being in that deep squat and going into a lunging pattern, a kneeling pattern. It's really a cool position when you watch them. You always wonder, oh man, do their knees hurt? But I think if you've been doing it long enough, your body has realized I am comfortable here. Now, also getting off the floor. That's where the Turkish get up comes in. It's great to teach older clients the Turkish get up to see what the knee does and if they're able to move that properly or if they want to get off the ground in a different way. And I'll tell you a very brief story. My final instance of knowing that I needed to learn and practice mobility was probably in 2012 when a trainer at the gym I was working at asked me to get on the ground with him in an Indian style or crisscross applesauce style because we were doing an assessment on a client. And I sat on the ground and my knees were like 12 inches off the ground. My hips were so tight. That started my journey of mobility. I used to hold like a standing pigeon stretch for 10 minutes at a time. And nowadays I don't have to do that anymore because I put the work in. But if you're playing with your kids on the ground and you can't find a comfortable position, or you like to meditate and you can't sit in lotus, that is part of the practice and it's probably worth doing. Okay, let's move on to a little bit more talk on bridges, not necessarily the neck bridges, but bridges overall. I already touched on that with the spine section, but with Pavel, this was a cool historical lesson, talking about old wrestlers, especially from India, now old strongmen, gymnasts. I know my work with Ido Portal. Bridge work isn't new, but oftentimes we forget about it because everyone's bodybuilding and taking selfies in the gym. So extension strength. One thing I've had issues with bridging is that my back would cramp up. It's like man, I'm using my back musculature instead of flexing my abs. And that little tweak will allow me a little bit more extension. I already told you my stretch I do with my clients where you touch the toes and then lean back toward the wall. That's a really good one if someone can't bridge. And most people aren't going to be able to bridge. So if someone were truly interested in training that, you have to start their feet very high on top of like a box or on top of a bench. But if you're doing a sport like martial arts or jujitsu, I remember when I was training jujitsu with Clark Gracie, we would do like a lot of bridging. This is an exercise that we learned also at Resilient, where you're leaning back toward a wall and you're kind of doing rotational bridges. Not full range of motion like a bridge from the floor, but excellent stuff to do. It's going to build a lot of spinal awareness. And if you're training your lumbar and in general your back musculature, it's going to improve athleticism just to have that range of motion. I mean, I played some pickleball this morning with Diana and we were just practicing overhead serves, even though that's a no-go in pickleball. And I find it really interesting just to watch her. She has a tennis background and is so good at hitting the ball. But watch a tennis player throw the ball up before they serve it. Do you think their spine's going into some extension? For sure it is. And I know with my lifting and my athletic stuff, especially some of the exercises that I'm putting into the black book, it's a no-go in StrongFirst Level 2 to do a jerk with any extension in your back. That is not the reality of training. You're going to have some slight extension in the lumbar spine and hopefully get that T-spine nice and mobile to support the kettlebells in a power snatch or into a jerk position. It's just the fact of the matter. If you want to be athletic, you have to move in different patterns. You can't be super stiff all the time. So hopefully this inspires you to get into your own spinal training. I have some resources on my Substack that I can link to with that stuff, but the bridge has almost disappeared from strength culture, and it's probably time to bring that back. I think entire generations of wrestlers growing up doing it says something that probably the rest of us are missing. Okay, finally, guys, I want to talk about a little bit of rotation. In sport, we're always rotating. I train a lot of golfers and even some tennis players. You're doing a lot of rotation. I'm training a baseball player in Louisiana right now who might go to the pros. He's rotating, I know, when he's pitching and batting. Anytime you're throwing something, you're rotating. Fighting rotates a lot too. Throwing all your punching combinations, kicking combinations, throwing combinations. Traditional strength training often removes rotation. It doesn't have to. There are a lot of schools of thought and using cables. I'll just go back to my original training with Paul Czech and going to the Czech Institute. We did a lot of cable wood chops and kind of like unilateral punching patterns. All the stuff Paul Czech is famous for. That stuff is fantastic. I still wish I had a cable machine, but if I ever go to a hotel gym or a random gym, I always use the cable machine to do those exercises. They're fantastic. Track and field background and training with my buddy Franz Snyman. We got medicine balls. We did a lot of rotational throws, overhead throws, soccer ball throws, really good training. I think doing the exercises like we did at Resilient, they're really going to help. It's going to give us that durability in our joints that allows us to do that. Unfortunately, I've given some very basic throwing exercises with a medicine ball to some of my clients and learned my lesson very quickly. But them catching the throw from me, bringing their body into that spinal flexion and rotation has tweaked their back. Now, if I have someone who's doing some power training with a medicine ball, I will catch the ball from them and hand it back to them. So they're just doing that concentric because they didn't have the strength for the eccentric yet. There's a lot of ways that we can train rotation. At StrongFirst, we don't do that much, but a really good way of introducing kind of that frontal plane or transverse plane movement is to finish your training session with things like windmills or even doing some get-ups to get us out of that sagittal plane. In my own life with rotation, I train my core in a very stable position oftentimes, but I do Pallof presses as well. Even though it's an anti-rotation exercise, I usually get my rotation from club bell work, and I've found that to be a very good tool because it's giving you a lot of feedback. And I give that exercise to a lot of my clients as well as part of their circuits. We will have a heavy club bell, let's call it like 35 pounds or 45 pounds, just doing your basic side swing back and forth, feet staying planted. I tell them I don't want you doing a baseball or a golf swing. I want the feet planted. It forces them to have better ankle, knee, hip, and T-spine mobility, and they're loading that pattern and getting a lot of good strength from it. So rotation is a whole rabbit hole. I don't do a lot besides my club bells, but I have not found that I've needed much of it because I can still throw a football or a baseball or do gymnasticy and rock climbing stuff. Okay, finally, I want to talk about in this durability podcast, what impressed me the most about Strong First Resilience. I don't have enough good things to say about it. I wanted to record this podcast because it's still fresh in my mind and I had a week to think about it. But it wasn't necessarily the exercises or the mobility, the novelty, or the organization. After all, I've spent years collecting pieces from Gray Cook, FRC, Original Strength, my gymnastics coach, my martial arts coaches, TACFit, kettlebell culture with StrongFirst and other organizations, and physical culture like Ido Portal. But the main thing that impressed me was seeing many of these ideas assembled into a coherent framework, which is the beauty of StrongFirst and why I'm proud to be a StrongFirst Elite and Beast Tamer. Like I said, this is the type of framework that I teach to all of my clients, the organizational style at least. And we can deviate when we need to deviate, like if they want to do some bodybuilding or some other stuff, which I don't want them to do, but I give in. But this is just the organization, which I wish most trainers had this education because I only keep my certified strength and conditioning specialist. And that was a hard test to pass. That taught me nothing about training, not like StrongFirst stuff. This is like the real world applicability. And it teaches you not all these exercise correctives, which people typically don't need. It teaches you how to be strong. And when you're strong, StrongFirst always says strength fixes most problems. And I agree with that. You get someone shoulder strong in different range of motion or using those Indian clubs, they stop complaining about shoulder pain. You just have to be smart not to let them bench press too much. I will say this coherent framework is Pavel Macek's gift. He was a super sweet guy, lots of funny stories, lots of fun jokes. I respect him very much. It's one of my favorite courses I've taken from StrongFirst. He's a synthesizer. He finds patterns and he references people that I have also followed, which I truly appreciated. His organization, the manual was fantastic. It's the only manual with photos. His wife was awesome too. She taught some of this stuff, super sweet. And she's a great mover and very strong as well. It was great to have that team together. And Pavel's just an incredible teacher. Happy to have him as a master instructor in the organization. I'll be following his work very closely. And I didn't tell you guys this, but I took his course, Enter the Dumbbell, first time in the United States, the Friday before Resilience. I'm going to practice more of that stuff before I talk about it, but that was a lot of fun. It's cool to learn that old strongman dumbbell stuff. I just don't have a heavy enough dumbbell. I definitely want to do the overhead swing with a 100-pound dumbbell. I'll have to go to a client's house from that. Finally, guys, what I took home, strength still matters. I think it still matters the most. You know, I always say power is the master quality. That's kind of my tongue-in-cheek thing. I like power more than strength, but that's just because I'm good at power. Strength still matters though. A weak person doesn't need resilient training. A weak person needs strength. Eventually, the question changes. It's no longer how much force can you produce. It's how many environments can you produce it in. That is the bridge between strength and athleticism. And I believe that's what Resilient is ultimately trying to teach. So I hope you liked my durability framework. I'm trying not to steal anything from StrongFirst, but if you've coached with me, you know I use that word durability a lot. In my mind, that just means, oh man, I'm durable. It's like my Toyota 4Runner. That thing's never going to die because it's so durable, but it's also resilient. Okay? They're synonymous. Lastly, I don't think resilient contradicts StrongFirst. I think it completes it. So check it out for yourself. Thank you for listening, guys. I will have some podcasts in the next couple weeks for you. And signing off. Talk to you later.